something bad happens, don't complain that the people judging you are wrong. Do better and do something to improve it. I'm expecting you to get up and want to fight, which is what the average guy would do. And you got up and you ran over to me and you kind of shook my hand and said, "Hey, that was a nice hit. I bet you're proud of it." He's swinging like a madman at me. I reached out and actually grabbed him by the throat at arm's length to keep him away from me. One guy got into a fight, 50 guys from that team would be in there to bail him out. And that's the way it was. Too many people worry about the what ifs. Well, what if that guy's better than me? Well, work harder and practice. Take care of the things you could take care of.
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green and I have ALS. This podcast is not about ALS or living with disabilities. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I am a father of 5 with a marriage that's lasted for over 33 years. I am a #1 New York Times best-selling author of 41 books, an NFL first-round pick with an 8-year career. I worked on TV for Fox Sports, Good Morning America, Court TV, and Extra. I've hosted BattleBots, A Current Affair, and Find My Family. And I am also a practicing attorney. In this podcast, we're diving into real-life stories. From triumphs to trials, we'll explore the extraordinary in the ordinary. Join me, Tim Green, and my son Troy each week for real conversations, laughter, and insights. Because life is a journey, and everyone's got a story. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Ron Heller, you've played and coached football at the highest levels for some of the most famous and infamous names in the coaching profession. Welcome to our podcast, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor, and I'll tell you, it feels good to be on your side for once. The only time I've ever met you before, I was going against you, and it wasn't a pleasant situation. I do want to step out and say your son Troy was a champion. Makes me feel very welcome to the team. We went through a lot of trouble to get this connection working, and we finally did, and I appreciate that, Troy, and it's good to be on your team, Tim.
I'm happy to be on your team as well. Lining up against you was no walk in the park. What inspired you to play football, and when did you begin to play?
Well, quite honestly, I started playing when I was 7 years old. I grew up on Farmingdale, Long Island, and I played for the Farmingdale Hawks. It was actually a tackle football team, midget football, or little guy football. And they let me play a year earlier than I should have been allowed to play, but they said I could only do it if my father coached, so he coached. But the reason I wanted to play was, my father had played. I watched my uncle play, then I was watching my older brother play, and I just loved the game. So I started at an early age, and it's going to sound corny, but from the time I was 7, all I had in my mind was I wanted to go ahead and play pro football. So I was actually, had the enthusiasm, and it just kept falling into place. Had a lot of success, at that midget football, junior high, high school, and so on. So I was very fortunate that my dream just continued on for years.
What were your parents like in the stands?
Well, quite honestly, my parents were wonderful. They never missed a game when I was a kid. If they had to split up to go to a brother's game, or my sisters were cheerleading or something like that, somebody was always there. And to be real honest with you, they weren't very loud, but you knew they were watching. Now, my grandfather also came to every game, including high school games and college games, and you could hear his voice distinctly. And to this day, a lot of my high school buddies always ask about my grandfather because, if he was late for a game, they were worried about it. But my parents were very caring and supportive, but they were also quick to point out that maybe I wasn't as good as I always thought I was. And I'll tell you a quick story, and this kind of exemplifies the support I got from my parents. I was probably 12 years old, and I was a fullback. And by God, in my mind, I thought I was the best fullback around. And they replaced me with another guy on the team. And they moved me to a different position, to a tight end position. And I was so mad. And I kept asking the coaches, can I go back and play running back? And they just wouldn't let me. And I went home one night and I told my parents, that's it, I'm quitting. And my father said, well, that's fine. You could quit, but you could quit next year. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He says, well, you committed to play this year. You're going to play the rest of the year. And to be honest with you, I think the other guy is a better fullback than you. So you're going to finish out playing. And if you don't want to play next year, that's fine. But you made the commitment. And I remember my anger went from, the guy who beat me out to the coaches. And now it was at my parents, for making me play a position I didn't want to play. But that stuck with me for the rest of my life. And they wanted me to work hard and let the chips fall where they may. They supported me, but they weren't blind and thinking, that I was the next prodigy. And if something bad happened, they just told me to lick my wounds. And I believe that philosophy, what they instilled in me, helped me throughout my entire career, in football and business and everything else, in such that, if something bad happens, don't complain that the people judging you are wrong. Do better and do something to improve it. So, my parents, I went to Penn State and it was a 5-hour car ride away. And I didn't start there until I was a junior, and yet they came to every game. They never missed a home game at Penn State, and it always made me practice hard or work harder in pregame warmups when I was a freshman and a sophomore, because I knew they drove all that way. They wanted to watch me perform, and it was only during pregame. But anyway, the bottom line is I had great support from my parents. They encouraged me, but they wouldn't let me think I was better than I was or I deserved something I didn't. So, for that, I'm always thankful.
Did your dad coach you just in the midgets team, or did he coach you all the way through?
He actually, to be honest with you, when he agreed to coach, he went and coached my older brother's team because they already had coaches at mine. So he never actually coached me in football, but they needed coaches for other teams.
You must have been recruited by everyone. Do you remember George O'Leary from Syracuse?
Oh, of course I remember him. Quite honestly, I was a Syracuse fan. I'm a couple of years older than you, and I was recruited by Syracuse heavily, and I actually committed to Syracuse verbally, and then right before I changed my mind, for a multitude of reasons. But of course, I knew who O'Leary was, and I know of his history, and I also know that you guys have a great relationship still to this day, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. He actually, I bet you he doesn't forget anything either. I bet he still remembers you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask if you verbally committed to and then flipped. I'm not asking. I don't want to hear it.
Well, actually, it's a good story. I wasn't sure. I wanted to go there. I wasn't sure if I could fit in or not. I take no offense to this, Tim, but I felt a little more secure going to Syracuse, had a better chance of playing sooner. And then a player named Joe DeAnge, who was from Farmingdale, my high school, a guy that I looked up to, had gone to Penn State, and he was a graduate assistant. And when I called Syracuse to tell them I was coming, I also called Penn State and told them that I was not. And a little while later, this Joe DeAnge, who was the graduate assistant up there, called me up and he talked to me and said, basically said, hey, they want to recruit you if they didn't think you had a chance to play here. And so it was kind of a hometown deal. He talked me into it, but always enjoyed watching Syracuse before and after, not while I was at Penn State.
Was that the final reason you chose Penn State? Was there anything else that pushed you there?
Well, it's kind of funny. I went on a lot of recruiting trips, as I'm sure you did, and everywhere I went, they offered me things. I'm not going to say what they were, but I visited Southern schools, Auburn, and I visited LSU. I visited Syracuse, Temple, and Duke, and everywhere I went, they asked me or let it be known that things could be provided for me, including transportation for my parents to and from games, access to, boats to go fishing. Nothing huge like, some star running back would get. But when I went to Penn State, they were going to bring me out on the field and show me the stadium. And it was a pretty cold day, and I didn't have a jacket. It was in my parents' car. They went somewhere else on the tour, and they asked me if I wanted a sweatshirt to go outside, and I said, of course. So they gave me a Penn State football sweatshirt, and I just thought, wow, this is really great. I'm a high school kid, and I'm wearing a legitimate Penn State football sweatshirt. We went out on the stadium and looked around, and then when it was over, they asked if I wanted to keep the sweatshirt, and I said yes, and they said, well, that'll be $15. And I didn't have any money. And I said, what do you mean? Like, you're going to make me pay for this? And they said, oh, yeah, we don't give anything away. And Joe Paterno told my parents that if anybody from Penn State did offer me anything, to let him know, and they'd be fired. And I remember being, a very competitive person, and I missed my sophomore and junior year in high school because of injuries. And I didn't think I would get recruited as much as I did. But in my mind, I was worried that somebody with more statistics or better known would beat me out in an unfair competition, if you will. And when Penn State came and said, hey, we're not going to try to buy you, we're not going to offer you anything special, we're going to treat you like we treat a three-time high school All-American, I felt that I would have the purest chance of making it. And I guess, the integrity, that they exemplified, that, hey, if you're good enough, you're going to play, we're going to give you a fair chance, but you got to follow our rules, which I needed a little discipline, a little strong, eye watching over my shoulder. But, basically, I felt that because they were so rigid in following the rules, that I would have the best chance, best chance of being fairly judged as a player.
When you went to the schools down south, was it mostly those kind of schools that were offering? I mean, you said you're not saying what it is, but assuming money and things like that.
It
Was
was.
it mostly down south? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was pretty interesting. Let's just say those recruiting trips were a lot more socially oriented than when I visited Syracuse and Penn State, where it was all football oriented and going places like that. But yeah, there were some interesting things offered, and this is back in the late '70s, and there wasn't a lot of people keeping an eye on what was going on with recruits. But I'm thankful. I already talked about my parents. I was raised in a good atmosphere, and I also thought, if they could give it without earning it, they could sure take it away too. So I settled on going to Penn State, where I knew if I earned something, it was mine. They couldn't take it away.
Without giving away the school name, what's the craziest thing that anyone offered you? Or the funniest thing?
Well, access to an automobile, and flying my parents to every home game, from Long Island, New York to, wherever we're talking about. And, again, though, I mean, that sounds exciting, but I was smart enough to realize that, then you're at their beck and call. And, if something happens and you break a leg and you can't play, then what happens to these things, and I knew a story. There was a guy named Sean McNamara from Sachem, Long Island. He was a parade All-American lineman, and he had gone to Penn State as a freshman and got hurt like in the first couple of days and never played a down for him. He was out. And Joe Paterno kept him on football scholarship, even though he wasn't going to play anymore. But he said, I promised you an education. You got hurt trying. Just come help out in the weight room and we'll keep you on scholarship. His father happened to be a Long Island clammer. He dug clams for a living. And apparently he fell in the water and, got pneumonia or whatever, like in the winter. And he wasn't doing very well. And this was Sean's junior year. And he went into Joe Paterno and said, hey, I've got to quit school. My father's ill. He's in the hospital. I've got to go home and get a job and make money for my family. 99% of the coaches would love this, saying, okay, give me my scholarship back, shake his hand and say, good luck to you. But Joe says, oh, no. He says, what kind of job are you going to get being a college dropout? Your parents will survive. You got another year left of school. Stay on scholarship, get your degree, then go home and help your parents. And I had heard of, these types of stories about Joe Paterno, before I went there. And obviously while I was there, those type of things played out.
It's always good when you hear stories like that about coaches. He seemed great when I spoke with him during my recruitment. In your pro career, you got voted offensive MVP by your teammates. How did that feel? And what do you think earned you that recognition?
Well, I appreciate that question because that is one of the, we've all gotten a lot of awards and whatnot. And that's one of my most cherished awards. I was the first offensive lineman ever voted offensive MVP by the Philadelphia Eagles. And, I played through a lot of injuries that year, and there were games that I could have sat out and I didn't sit out. But my teammates knew that I would be there for them, and I would line up and get the job done, whether I had a broken hand or torn plantar fascia, which I did have both that year, and never missed a game. And I don't know that I was the best athlete or anything of that nature, because we had Randall Cunningham and Keith Byers, Keith Jackson, several All-Pro offensive weapons. But I think that my teammates, and especially going across the line, the defensive teammates really appreciated my fighting atmosphere or fighting attitude that, I'm never going to give up. And, that kind of represented what the Philadelphia Eagles were about at that time. And for them to acknowledge, that they thought I represented them the best was one of the greatest awards I ever received. In fact, for years, that was the only trophy I ever had showing in my house. Of course, now that I'm retired and, I sit around and look at blank walls, I hang some more stuff. But that was one of the greatest awards. And I really did appreciate my teammates thinking that highly of me.
Your time at Penn State was while defensive coordinator Jerry Sandusky was there. Did you see anything afterwards that made sense to you that was illuminated by the sexual abuse scandal that sullied even the reputation of one of the top college coaches, the venerable Joe Paterno?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was at Penn State, I loved Jerry Sandusky. He was always a little different than all the other Penn State coaches. He always had a shirt tail sticking out. His collar was flipped up. His hair wasn't combed. There was just, his hair was longer than all the other coaches. You think of Penn State, you think of, coaches wearing a tie and a jacket, and Jerry was always just a little different. But Jerry was a great guy as far as I knew at the time. I was coaching with the Jacksonville Jaguars when this story came out. And, during coaching in the NFL, you don't have a lot of time to follow what's going on or to communicate with people. But my younger brother called me up, and he's the one who broke the news to me. And my younger brother played at Penn State, and he knew Jerry very well. He was really good friends with one of Jerry's sons. And my brother calls me up, and I have no idea what's going on. And his first thing is, hey, so what do you think about Jerry Sandusky? And I actually said, well, he's a goofy bastard, but I love him. That was my first reaction. And my brother goes, you haven't heard, have you? And I said, no. And he goes, these are the accusations. And I went, oh, I could see that. I would never suspect it, but, there was just some different things about him. You would never, ever think anything was wrong. But, that it was heartbreaking to find that out. But, it was just a little weird. Well, then all of a sudden, fingers get pointed at Joe Paterno. And I already mentioned before this topic came up that, Joe was the salt of the earth. And from what I understand, and I may not know the whole story, Joe followed protocol, went to the university president, went to the local police, did what he had to do, went to the athletic director, and was handling it the way it was to be handled. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Joe had tried to get Jerry to move on several times because they butted heads before this incident. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, Jerry was retired at the time, wasn't even working for Penn State when he got arrested for this. But Joe did what he was told, and then when nothing happened, apparently he called the police and the athletic director and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And they said, we talked to Jerry and it's a big misunderstanding. And at that time, Joe said, "I don't care about any misunderstanding. I don't want him in my buildings anymore." And he didn't quite know the depth of everything that was going on. And Joe was told, "Well, you can't keep him out of your buildings because part of his retirement, his severance package was access to those buildings because he ran that big charity, the Second Mile, and he negotiated into his retirement with the state university that he has access to the athletic buildings to, help, raise money with the donors." So Joe took a lot of heat, like he was covering something up. I guarantee you he didn't cover anything up. He may have known something weird was going on, but didn't know what it was. Um, I'm actually, there's still a lot of people that think Jerry didn't do anything. I don't know 100%, but, all the evidence points to that he is guilty of everything he's accused of. And for that, I'm really mad at him because Penn State did have a great reputation. And, I'm a big boy. I could take the joking and the ribbing and stuff like that. People, "Hey, you ever shower with Jerry?" And, all of that. But, he did tarnish a great university. And, when I was there and for years after I was there, I never thought I would have to sit and talk in this defensive mode trying to defend Penn State's reputation. But I guarantee Joe Paterno did nothing to enable that to go on. And, when he found out about it, I know he wanted it gone. And I also think that, the people that be at Penn State, the board of directors and all that, they kind of wanted Joe to move on. He was 84. And, these people were trying to get a promising career in academics, running the university and such. But Joe was still the guy who ran the university. And I think they had never been accused of anything wrong and didn't know how to handle the accusations. That when the NCAA came after Penn State and Joe and all that, they just threw their hands up and said, "Do whatever you want, find us whatever you want. Let's just get out of this situation." They weren't used to being in that situation. And I think by not backing Joe right away, that led to some problems as well. But I do believe that history will prove itself, that Joe had nothing to do with a cover up. Jerry Sandusky is a problem person, and I think he's being punished the way he should be. And it's hard for me to say that because at one time I respected the heck out of him. But, it doesn't change my opinion of Joe Paterno one bit, and really doesn't change my opinion of the Penn State reputation one bit.
Yeah, I think the knock on Paterno was he got, allegedly a guy. I don't know much about this probably as you do, but he was told that there was something going on, like something inappropriate, and he reported it, which is what he was supposed to do. To your point, but
Yeah.
I think the knock that people say is that he should have done more than he did. Of course, now it's easy to say that, but I don't know what he was told.
Well, it is, and nobody knows. But I do want to add one more thing. And if you ever been around Joe Paterno, he had all the glory and all that, but he didn't care about it. And the last time I saw him speak publicly, there was media and people and everybody outside his house when all this was going on, and he came out to address the crowd. And he stood there and he said, "Hey, the reporters wanted to know his side of the story." And I guess he'd already been told by lawyers on every side, "Don't talk about it publicly. There's going to be, big court cases and such." And he came out and said, "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." But they kept asking him, "What do you know?" And he says, "My story will get out. And when it does, I feel fine about that." And he died before he ever actually came out and said what he knew. But for the people who have been around him and the people that he's molded from young men into big, strong, good men in the community, We know different. We know that Joe would not have anything to do with any type of cover up.
Was Dave Zott there when you were, or maybe you ran into him while he was with the Jets and you were coaching the offensive line there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so Dave Zott went to Penn State after I went, and he actually played with my younger brother. And the only time I ever met Dave Zott was when he was playing with the Kansas City Chiefs, and I was, playing with the Eagles, Buccaneers, and the Dolphins. But yeah, Dave, he's not a coach with the Jets. I forget the term or the name of the position, but basically he takes all the rookies and takes them under his wing and teaches them how to be pros. Very valuable position, and he does real well. But Dave's one of the greatest guys, and I always admired the way he played football. And he's just a wonderful guy, and they couldn't have gotten a better guy to mentor these young players, especially in today's world.
Dave is so nice and such a prominent Christian that I felt guilty at his non-judgmental presence until I became a born-again Christian myself. But I have got a long way to go.
Well, we all have a long way to go, and yeah, Dave Zott is a great example for anybody to follow, with his Christian faith. But as long as we're talking about you, I wanted to make sure that I got this in, if you don't mind. I remember playing against you, and you think, all right, I'm going to sit down with you and we're going to talk, and the first thing that comes to my mind were two things. I remember playing against you, especially when I was with Philadelphia. You were with Atlanta, and it reminded me of the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And what I mean by that is when they were on the run and the law was following them and there was a posse coming after them, every time they stopped to catch their breath, they'd look over their shoulder and go, "Who are those guys?" Because they just kept coming. They thought they were outsmarting them and getting away. And we'd get back to the huddle, and they're like, "What's with that Green? Does he ever get tired?" And all the linemen would be talking like, it was like you were just a nuisance. You never slowed down, and it drove us nuts. The second thing I remembered was there was one time, and I was an offensive tackle, and I pulled out around the end and got outside, and the running back was, coming around the corner, and you were running laterally down the field. So you couldn't see me out of your peripheral vision. And I remember I got a good shot on you, and it was one of those where, when you're watching film, everybody's going to go, "Oh, nice hit." And, I'm expecting you to get up and want to fight, which is what the average guy would do. And you got up and you ran over to me and you kind of shook my hand and said, "Hey, that was a nice hit. I bet you're proud of it." He says, but you're not going to do it again, or something like of that nature, and it was one of those rare moments. But I was expecting a fight at you, and that goes out of you. But that goes back to what we were talking about, like, you don't get something for nothing, and you acknowledge that I lucked into that one and I got a good block, and all right, you got me on this one, but I'll get you next time. And I always admired that.
I never hear any. My dad never tells any NFL stories. So,
Oh yeah.
Anything else you got, Ron? You got to let me in on it after.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always respected other fierce competitors like yourself. Hey, can you walk us through the whirlwind of trades you experienced in 1988 and how you stayed mentally focused during that chaotic period?
Yeah, sure. It's actually a pretty good story, but I'm a traditionalist. I got drafted by Tampa Bay. We were not a very good team, and we were 2-14, 6-10, then 2-14, 2-14. It was just horrible, and everybody thinks I wanted to leave and get traded from Tampa because we were losing, but that's not the truth. That was my team, and I wanted to stay there until we won. But Ray Perkins came in as the head coach my fourth season in Tampa, and I was going to say we butted heads, but he butted heads with everybody. And I'll be honest with you, and I've talked to his son about it. I'm still good friends with his son. I would have quit football. I don't know if that's true, but I say that if I had to stay and play for him anymore. He took the fun out of it. And we had a little incident that was not anything to do with me, but I got caught in the middle of it. And I lost every bit of respect for him, and I couldn't play for him anymore. So I went and asked to be traded. And I asked during the season. There was, 87 season. There were still 4 or 5 games left, and the trading deadline was over. And he, said, "Look, just give me great effort the rest of the year, and if you still want to get traded at the end of the year, I'll trade you." Okay. So the end of the year comes in, and I'm sitting in his office, and I told him I wanted to be traded, and he says, "All right, we'll work on it." The day before the draft, I get traded to the Seattle Seahawks. And I'm like, okay, that's great, and I'm going to go do that. But I didn't have a contract, and so the draft comes and goes, and I negotiate with the Seattle Seahawks, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. The day before the draft, I got traded to Philadelphia Eagles, and I went up there, and I didn't have a contract. We were trying to negotiate it. A week goes by and we can't get the contract negotiated. So my agent, calls back to Tampa and says, "Hey, you traded him to Philly. We can't work a contract out. What do we do?" And they traded back for me. So I actually got a letter one day saying I am now the property of the Philadelphia Eagles. A day or 3 days later, I get a letter saying now I'm back to being a Buccaneer again. Well, a couple of days later, he trades me to Seattle. So I'm like, all right, great. Work a contract out. They give me a nice signing bonus. Everything's good. I go out to training camp, and I'm supposed to replace a guy named Mike Wilson. He was going into his 12th year, and he was out of Georgia, great player, but they thought he was, getting a little older. And I came in, and to be honest with you, he had a great training camp. And after the third preseason game, I come in, and we had played in Detroit, which is very interesting. And I played against, Tim, you probably remember Eric Williams, a defensive tackle up in Detroit, came out my year, and he was from Washington State. No, University of Washington, sorry. And, I played against him, but I had been in his division with the Buccaneers, so I played against him twice a year for 4 years. And then I went up there, and I'm with Seattle, and I played him in a preseason game, and he was laughing. He didn't recognize me. Well, Monday after that game, I'm going in, and they're waiting for me outside the building, the Seahawk building. And, the guy says, "Hey, Chuck Knox wants to see you." And I'm like, "Oh, am I cut?" And he said, "No, but it's big." And I went up, and Chuck Knox said, "Hey, we traded for you to take over Mike Wilson's spot. And, he's really having a great camp. And, we've got to give it to the incumbent. So we traded you back to Philly." So here, Philly tried trading for me. And originally we couldn't work a contract out. Seattle pays me a signing bonus, and then they trade back so that they got me for what they were offering the first time, and I got what I wanted. So my wife was out in Seattle, and she was actually, they sent me home and said, "Hey, you're going to be picked up by a driver, taken to the airport. You got to fly to Philly, like in a couple of hours." So I went back to our apartment in Seattle, and I realized my wife wasn't there. She was taking a written test to become a pilot. And, back then you didn't have cell phones, you can't text. So I called her up in the middle of the test, and they got her out, and she's like, "Wow, how dare you do this?" And I says, "Hey, I got traded, I'm going to Philadelphia." And she starts screaming, "Philly, no, oh my God." She didn't want to go there. And long story, she goes, "Hey, I'll talk to you when I get home." And I said, "Well, I won't be here. They're coming to get me." So they came, picked me up, flew me to Philly. I got there on a Tuesday morning, it would be early, practiced Tuesday. Wednesday, we flew back out to Detroit to play the Lions in a preseason game again. And Buddy Ryan was the head coach of the Eagles. And he come up to me, before we get on the plane, he says, "We didn't trade for you to sit on the bench. You better be worth something. You're going to play the whole game." Normally starters don't play the whole last preseason game, but it was the Thursday night game and short rest. And I didn't even know what the cadence was or the plays or anything like that. But I also knew that my job was on the line if I didn't play well. But we flew back out, and, so this is, less than a week later, I'm playing the Detroit Lions again, and we break the huddle, and Eric Williams looks at me and is like, Heller, is that you? Because now I'm in a third uniform that he's seen in a short period of time. But it was quite a stressful game. Randall Cunningham, believe it or not, would walk with me to the offensive line, to the line of scrimmage, and out loud, everybody knew it. You've got that guy. If that backer comes, you get him. Like, he was giving me the assignments because I didn't know, what the plays were or anything like that. And it just so happened that the following week was going to be the first game of the year, and it opened up down in Tampa, the team that I had just played 4 years with. So, I mean, there's just emotions going everywhere. And I don't know, Tim, if you remember a tight end named Jimmy Giles, but Jimmy had played and he was an all-pro down in Tampa for years, but he's with the Eagles now. So we go down for opening game, and Buddy Ryan says, hey, we're going to, introduce the offense because I want to see, Jimmy Giles and Ron Heller get introduced, and I want to see the crowd boo them. And in front of the rest of the team, he says, I bet you guys $50 each that the crowd boos you. And I'm like, there's no way they're going to boo me. I was beloved, Well, they go down the line and they introduce offensive starters, and, it goes from center to guard to right tackle. They start booing me so loud that when Jimmy Giles got introduced as the tight end after me, they couldn't even hear his name, so they didn't even know it was him. So his bet was canceled. I had to pay Buddy Ryan $50. But one of the greatest things I remember about that game, other than playing against my friends, that guys that were teammates, was when I was in Tampa, we didn't win many games at all. We were horrible. And we go down there and opening day game with the Eagles, and we beat them. And a reporter asked me after the game, like, oh, how do you feel, coming down here, playing your old team and, beating them and this and that. And I thought about it and I said, I'm just not used to having a winning record this late in the season. And that brought a lot of laughs from my old teammates and such. But, I was 1-0. It was the first time I had a fifth year in the NFL, the first time I had a winning record in the NFL. So it was quite a whirlwind. I tried to condense it, but there was a lot that went on
That's
during
crazy.
that period.
Yeah, that's a crazy, and getting traded and then traded back as well in the same couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Hey, what was the? You said there was an incident that happened in Tampa that made it so you just couldn't play there anymore. What was the incident?
Well, Vinny Testaverde had been drafted as the number one pick in the draft, I guess. And he hadn't played yet, and this was going to be his first start in New Orleans against the Saints. Ray Perkins was the coach, and we go down there, and Vinny fumbles the first snap. They recovered on the 20. They score. We fumble the next possession. We're down 14-0. Then they score. We're down 21-0, and then Vinny Testaverde lights it on fire. This is down in New Orleans, and he brings us back to 21-14 at halftime, and he wound up setting the rookie yards passing record that game. I mean, he lit it on fire. So we go in at halftime, and everybody's all excited. We're in this game, and Ray Perkins gives his speech, and I'm standing there, and I just said, "Hey, whatever you do, just don't quit, and we're going to win this thing." And I'm saying this to my team. And Perkins turned around and just said, "Who mentioned quitting?" and just punched me right in the jaw. And, everybody's wondering what's going on. And he's swinging like a madman at me. I reached out and actually grabbed him by the throat at arm's length to keep him away from me. And he's just swinging and punching. We don't talk about quitting. And I wasn't advocating quitting. And I don't know, he just lost his mind. So anyway, the ref says, hey, we got to go, 2 minutes, and everybody leaves the locker room. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, I'm standing there shaking, thinking, I just had an altercation with my head coach. And the funny thing is, Vinny Testaverde was the one that pulled him off me. And Vinny, because he's like, hey, you're not going to screw up my first start. But I remember the team went out, and I didn't know what to do because I'm afraid that no matter what the truth is, a player had an altercation with a coach, I'm going to be blackballed from the league. So I've got all these things going on, but I was going to quit, but I don't want to quit. So I came walking out, and they had gotten the kickoff, the opening kickoff of the half. So defense was out there, and I come walking out. And Ray Perkins came up to me and said, you all right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, what kind of man are you? You didn't even hit me back. And I about lost. I called him every name in the book, and they pulled him off me again. So when that was over, I went into him right away, after the game, and I told him I want to be traded. I've got to be traded. And he said, well, there's, we're past the trading deadline, and that was the incident.
When you said he hit you right on the jaw, I thought you meant like verbally he blasted you. I didn't think you meant.
Oh, he was swinging. In fact, to tell the whole story, so we all go to get on the bus. We wound up losing, but an exciting game. But we all go, shower after the game, get on the buses, and we're waiting. And there's no head coach. Where's the head coach? Where's that going? We're all waiting. He comes walking on the bus, and he's wearing a cast. He broke 2 fingers, his pinky and ring finger on his right hand, and he broke it on my shoulder pads or whatever. I don't know, but it was from punching at me.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Could you imagine that happening now? Imagine that happening now. Imagine the media circus.
Oh, incredible. Well, and the funny thing is, Monday when he addressed the team, he said, I don't want this story to come out. If it ever comes out and I find out who let it out, you'll be blackballed from the league. You'll never have a job in the NFL again. He tells us this. Well, a couple of years later, it did come out, or the year I got the following year. And he researched, found out it was a secretary who had been with the Buccaneers since the inception in '76. And this was 1987. And found out that she leaked it to a reporter. And he called her in and told her her services were no longer needed. So he kept true to his promise.
What a lunatic.
Yeah, he was.
Truly insane. I want to ask you about a story I heard about when you first arrived in Philadelphia. What was going through your mind when head coach Buddy Ryan lined up the entire defensive line for one-on-one pass protection drills?
How did you hear about that? So what you're referring to is the day I showed up. I flew from Seattle to Philly, got in after midnight. That Jimmy Giles that I mentioned had been my teammate in Tampa, was sitting in the hotel lobby after midnight, not to welcome me, but to warn me that Buddy Ryan's a little different than the average coach, and he just wanted me to know what to expect. And to this day, that meant the world to me, that friendship, him doing that. So I didn't go in there, a little blind. But by the time the next morning I went to the hospital and got a physical and all that, we come back to the stadium and the team's walking out. I haven't slept all night. I'm totally exhausted. My wife's, all the way across the country, and, I'm doubting everything in the world right now. And the team is walking out to go to the practice field, and I'm pulling in a van and I'm watching what's going on. So they go out and they stretch and all this. I go in, they give me my pads. By the time I get out on the field, practice is full go. I mean, these guys are warmed up and they're going. I don't even have my chin strap fixed right and my helmet's not right. And Buddy Ryan blows a whistle and says, all right, hey, that son of a gun we traded for is finally here, and he says, everybody bring it in. And I'm, oh gosh. I mean, I'm tired and all. So he says, let's see if I don't know if I could curse, but he says, let's see if he's worth a shit. So he says, defensive line up. And there's like 10 of them. And he goes, we're going to do one-on-ones. And, that's exhausting doing one of them, doing 2 of them. I hadn't slept, and all I see is a line of 10 people. And all I want to find out is where's Reggie White and where's Jerome Brown? Because, those are the baddest guys on that team. They were the only ones I knew. And I kept looking, and I'd get down and just set hot, and I'd have to block them. Set hot, I have to block them. And, my butt was burning. My back was killing me. And, I mean, I'm breathing hard and just totally exhausted. And later I watched it, and to Reggie and Jerome's credit, they very easily could have put me on my ass, but they both, weren't trying to prove themselves at that point. But when it was over, Buddy blew the whistle and said, all right, he'll do. Line up for 9-on-7. So 9-on-7 is a run drill, which is very hard for the linemen, as you know. And, so I'm just standing back there and huffing and puffing, and they line up, they get in the huddle, and I'm still trying to adjust my equipment. And Buddy Ryan comes up to me and goes, "What are you doing?" I says, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" He says, "We didn't trade for you to stand back here. Get your ass in there." So now I had to go in and run this drill live, and again, I didn't know what I was doing, the snap count or anything. But I'll tell you what, it proved myself to the team, to Buddy, and it also let me know exactly, the mentality that Buddy Ryan had, and that the Philadelphia Eagles had, and I was a little questioning it a little bit in the beginning, but I fell in love with that whole atmosphere.
Buddy was one of a kind. Do you remember the scrimmage we had in Atlanta? A brawl broke out. I was punching some guy in the ear, and I looked up and saw that I was surrounded by a bunch of your guys' linemen a lot bigger than me, and my fight quickly turned into flight.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I do remember that. I wasn't there. I was missing with the knee. I had a scope during that period, so I wasn't there. But I know all about it. I saw it on the news every night, and that's the one thing. I was talking about Buddy Ryan. It's funniest thing. He wanted offense to fight against the defense, big guys to fight against little guys, everybody on the team to hate the administration upstairs, this and that, because he wanted everybody at a fever pitch. But by God, if one guy got into a fight, 50 guys from that team would be in there to bail him out. And that's the way it was. And I know Jerry Glanville had a very similar philosophy, and it was fun, you felt like you were on something bigger than the average team. And I'm glad to hear that my fellow line mates intimidated you a little bit.
My mom said that when my dad got to Atlanta and she was down there, then every day on the local news, it'd be like, Atlanta first round draft pick Tim Green gets into another fight today.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So we were talking about that play where I kind of got you, Tim. You were running laterally and didn't see me. You were known as a fighter, and I was too. But you didn't fight because you got beat or because you didn't like the guy. You fought when they did something wrong. That time with you, I did nothing wrong. You came over and shook my hand. And I fully expected you to get up and fight. And that's a problem with a lot of guys. If you block them and you beat them or whatever, they want to take a swing at you, and that's when I know you would get upset and I would get upset. God knows you never started it, right?
You were called a dirty player by some opponents. How did you handle that reputation while maintaining your integrity on the field?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I alluded to people thought I was a fighter and this and that. I can honestly say in 12 seasons, and I was a starter all 12, I never got called for a personal foul. Of course, I had, a holding or an offsides here or there. Never had an unnecessary roughness. So I believed that I was getting paid to play football, and I loved every minute of it. I told you I missed my sophomore and junior year of high school, and I just thought every snap I take, I'm going to play it like it's my last from that point on. And most linemen, as they'll stand there. And when I coached, this drove me nuts. I would tell them, don't stop just because the ball or the ball carrier got in front of you. And you watch any NFL game now, and you'll see, the guys are battling, and then the ball's thrown, and then they stand there and they watch it, or the running back runs by. Well, meanwhile, you've got people like you, Tim, linebackers, DBs, running all over, and this poor running back is downfield, by himself, getting people jumping on him. And, so I took it as, hey, I want to play the game till the whistle blows, and I don't want them doing that to my running back. So I ran downfield, and I got extra blocks downfield, and this always killed me. Some guy would be diving through the air to get a shot at my running back or the running back, and I would dive and hit him, and he'd get up and call me cheap. And I'd say, how could I be cheap if, I'm preventing you from landing on top of my running back or the running back? And so it drove me nuts. people that knew me, I really appreciate when they, Howie Long, different players throughout the years that, hey, I heard you were dirty. You're not dirty. You're just a hard player. And that always made me feel better. It did bother me, but I dealt with it because my rookie coach called me into the office one day and said, you've got potential to be a Pro Bowl player. He says, but you're never going to get voted for because when you're done, people don't like you. And he says, but that's a good thing, because you'd rather have that than walk off the field and everybody go, oh, what a nice guy he was. You're out there battling. So my rookie coach told me you have a choice. You could stop playing the way you play, but that's not you, and you could possibly get votes to the Pro Bowl, or you could keep playing the way you're playing and have fun. And I wasn't gonna stand there and campaign for the Pro Bowl, so I kept playing, till the whistle blew, and I think I just frustrated people, and they mistook, aggressive for dirty, and because I never was dirty, never had a personal foul or anything like that, but just like you, Tim, you didn't let somebody shove you when the play was over or try to intimidate you. And, I think especially coming from an offensive lineman, that frustrated some people. And getting back to what we were talking about earlier, my teammates voting me for offensive MVP, I heard from guys like Reggie White, Seth Joyner, and people on our defense. They said, we loved it. You're an offensive lineman playing like a defensive player. And I took that as a great compliment. So it bothered me. It bothers my daughter now if she ever gets on the internet and reads some article or something. And but it was what it was, and I was true to myself, and I know I wasn't dirty, and I was a sportsman, and I'd have guys after games saying, "Oh, you're a classy guy, nice playing against you," but the guy next to him, who took a cheap shot at me, called me every name in the book and thought I was dirty. I can't explain it.
As someone who played against you, I can tell you that you were not a dirty player. What lessons from your playing days influenced your coaching philosophy at NFL Europe, the CFL, and the NFL?
When I was a player, or any sport for that matter, I was known as a hard worker, and I'll work as hard as you want. You want to have a 4-hour practice, you want to do that. But in my mind, I have to know that what I'm doing will make me better during the game, will make me better on the field. I played for coaches where, the quarterbacks and the receivers needed more time. So we needed space filler over here for the linemen, and they'd make up some stupid drill that just wore you out and hurt. And you knew it had nothing to do with becoming better. So and along with, I loved playing football. I wanted my players to have fun and to never think we were wasting time. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing hard. And if you do it hard and you do it the right way, you could apply it in a successful way on the field. And I think when you do that, because there's times where, we're supposed to be doing some drill and the linemen are tired, and I come and say, hey, listen, let's have an on the field meeting instead of doing that drill that's worthless. And the players appreciate that. They knew you were looking out for them, but then when you said saddle up and go, they saddle up and went. If you took care of them. So like I played for Don Shula down in Miami, and I'll tell you, that guy never wasted a second on a practice field. Every single thing you did was meaningful. And guys played so hard for him because they knew that. So, I guess the biggest thing I wanted was to create an atmosphere where, the players I coached thought I was helping them get better and thought I was showing them something and making them practice something that would be valuable out on the field. And in turn, when you feel you're getting that as a player, I know you play harder and like that Ray Perkins, I didn't respect the guy, and I always thought I played hard every play of my entire career. But as I'm older and I look back and I think, I remember playing for him, and at halftime we're down by a touchdown or two, and I remember thinking, maybe next week we'll get him. And at the time it didn't mean anything, but now I'm thinking mentally I'd already let go. I already thought we're not going to win. Even though I thought I was playing as hard as I could, how could I be if mentally I didn't do that? But I've had coaches and Don Shula where you could be down by 3 touchdowns and your mind's right, like, okay, we could score on a deep pass, if we could onside kick, because you respect them, so you're playing harder. And I tried to create the atmosphere where those players knew that everything I did was to give them a better chance to be successful.
You had really incredible coaches with Paterno and Shula and Buddy Ryan.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was very fortunate. Played for some great ones, and not just that, the offensive line coaches too. I played for the guy I mentioned that I had my rookie year, Kim Helton, was one of the greatest guys. I still keep in touch with him. He coached a long time in the NFL, and I was very fortunate. There was great leadership around, great position coaches, and I loved every minute of it except for a good portion of that season with Ray Perkins.
Except for when your coach fist fought you.
Yeah, that's one of those where you're sitting there and you're like, how did this happen to me? I'm just minding my own business, but that was it.
If it happened in a movie, no one would believe it.
Looking back on your NFL career and post-football life, what life lessons do you most cherish?
Well, I'll be honest with you. Joe Paterno always said he had a lot of great sayings that are always still to this day in the back of my head. And the one thing he told me, and when I wrestled in high school, and he told me this on my recruiting trip, but he always preached this to the team. You go to a wrestling match and watch the wrestlers. As they're getting taken down, they're on their way to get back up. You know what I mean? And that is true. They had nobody else to bail them out. They couldn't lick their wounds. They had to keep going. And I thought about that, and he, yeah, don't ever accept this bad thing happened to me. This bad thing, just keep getting up and going. And the other thing that he always said was, take care of the little things, and the big things will take care of themselves. And you think about it, oh, that's pretty cute. What is that? But if you do your homework, if you put money away, if you eat properly, and then whatever disaster comes, it'll take care of itself because you've got the foundation of the things that you can control. Too many people worry about the what ifs. Well, what if that guy's better than me? Well, work harder and practice. Take care of the things you could take care of, and think good things will happen. And I do believe that to be true. And so, I also personally gave everything I did, I could during games. And, people would ask my wife, oh, after a loss, your husband just must be mad. And no, I was the same way, win or lose, because I could look in the mirror and know I gave everything I did. I had, if I, didn't practice hard that week or study hard, or if I didn't play hard, boy, I'd have a hard time looking in the mirror, and I would be upset and throw my helmet and all. But if you're prepared and you go out there, you got to accept that sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. And I think that helped me in business too. Like when I got into business originally, I was selling pumps and valves to mines and refineries and paper factories. And, instead of worrying about, oh, I got to sell this $20,000 pump. No, I just had to make sales calls, take care of the things I could. Introduce myself, my product, do this and that. And then one day when they need one, the big one will take care of itself. I couldn't just walk in and expect to sell this big pump. And, so I think in sports, I learned those lessons, and it's helped me in everything I've done from business to relationships since then.
I remember Brian Kilmeade is telling me that because my dad won the state championship wrestling a couple years after you. And Brian was saying to me, you guys were both, we got the two state champion wrestlers, both played, Northeast Division I, both played in the NFL. He's like, Brian's like, you got to get Ron on there. He's like, you guys, your dad and him are,
Yeah.
he obviously speaks very highly of both you guys.
Yeah. Oh, that's great because I didn't meet him until a couple of years ago, and I've always admired him. So,
How did you transition from professional football to becoming a certified barbecue judge and champion and certified pit master?
well, easy. I always like to eat and drink beer, so the goal was there. Okay, um, you know. Um, it is kind of funny. I like eating and I like being outside. So I always tried to cook outside. My wife, who moved around quite a bit, but she went to high school in Texas. And I would cook, and by gosh, I would try hard. And I'd come in and just think, oh, this is great. And she'd be like, no, it's too tough, or you didn't put this seasoning on it. Like, she was pretty critical of me. And I'm one of those guys when it comes to cooking or something like that. I'll do it the same way every time, hoping it turns out different, which doesn't make sense. So one year for Christmas, it was while I was coaching with the Jaguars. She got me a gift to send me to a barbecue cooking school. And when I went there, boom, it just opened a whole new world. But it was taught by a guy named Myron Mixon, who was the winningest guy in barbecue. And he suggested that everybody uh, become a certified barbecue judge so that you know what the judges are looking for. So I signed up and I took the class and I did it and I became a certified barbecue judge, which is really great because then later in my career when I was coaching and moving around and going to different places, I'd always look up, see where a contest was, and I'd have something to do and I'd go judge contests. But as fun as that is, it was always fun to cook in it myself. And in fact, we're getting ready for a contest. Me and my son-in-law and a friend, we're going to go cook in a couple of weeks down in Lakeland, Florida. I think on the 24th or 5th of January. But it's a great passion and I love it. But to finish the story about my wife, so now that I went to the barbecue school and I got certified, she would still criticize my cooking. And it drove me nuts. But, just being an egotistical guy, I just couldn't accept it. Well, then she had the nerve. She went out and became a certified barbecue judge. And now I actually have to listen to her. And since I have been listening to her, I've done better. In fact, we won a chili cooking contest a couple of years ago, and it was her whole recipe, but she didn't want to take credit, so everybody thought I cooked it, but it was her.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Speaking of your wife, when and how did you two meet?
Well, interestingly enough, she was the cheerleader for the Buccaneers when I got drafted. And she, like I said, her father was in the oil business. She moved all over, really didn't have a hometown, but she went to college at University of South Florida. And on a dare with all her friends, hey, let's try out for the Swashbucklers, which is the cheerleading unit for the Buccaneers. And they all made it, and they're all still good friends. We were just down in Tampa with a core of them, uh, it was something glad she did. But her first 2 years were my first 2 years with the Buccaneers. And although I never met her, through cheerleading or football, I did run into her one night and kind of approached her and you know, just said my piece and asked for a date, and she said okay, and we wound up. She stopped cheerleading, and then she helped coach it the following year while I was still a player. But we were fortunate, and for some reason, she liked me, and we've been married 38 years now.
That's beautiful. People talk all the time about professional athletes squandering their money. Meanwhile, you split your time between Montana and Florida, two beautiful places. My question is, what's the best investment you've made?
Finding my wife, to be honest with you. So I came from a family that had 6 kids. We didn't have a lot of extra money. The best advice my father gave me was put your money away. And I'm like, okay, but I didn't know where to put it. So mistakes I made early was I would put it in a CD or whatever. I was too afraid to invest it, but I knew darn well, and going back, you asked me about my parents earlier. I knew, and from injuries in high school, that I didn't know how long it was going to last. So I was going to make that money stay as long as it could. And I didn't buy cars and jewelry and all that stuff until, that's not wrong. I never bought any of that when I was younger. Then I met my wife, and she kind of laughed, like, "Yeah, you did good with your money, but you could have done much better." And she had a finance degree, and she knows all about the market and all that. And my big philosophy was I never wanted to have debt because I didn't want to own a house while I was a player and then break a leg and be done playing and not be able to afford that house. So anything I did, I bought outright. Fortunate in the NFL you can do that, but I did that out of fear. But now I've read books about finances and stuff, and the best way to get ahead is to be out of debt, because instead of making payments to the bank, you could make that same payment to yourself as an investment. So I was very fortunate that I stumbled onto the be debt free part of things. But another big thing was I wasn't afraid to go out and work. Sure, I made a lot of money, but not like the guys make now. And I didn't want to kick back and live like a king for 10 years, then be broke. So I went out and I worked some pretty mundane jobs, if you will. I sold industrial equipment, which was fine. Somebody bought me out. Then I went and I sold cattle supplement out in Montana, and I mean, that's not a glamorous job. I'm driving around in some real bad weather, hauling a trailer and dropping stuff off, and and I wasn't making a lot of money, but I wasn't spending the money I already made playing football. Where a lot of guys, have a tough time, saying, "Oh, I'm going to go do that, low profile job." I mean, I can see how it happens to people because I played 12 years in the NFL. I put a lot of money away, and I was very proud of what I was doing. But you walk into an office to sell a pump to an engineer at a refinery, and first thing he says is, "Why are you selling pumps? Did you piss through all your money?" And you just wanted to scream, and they, you would make a sales pitch that you studied for, you know your product, and they would want to sit there and just like beat you in a debate about their product. Like, how dare you, a professional athlete, come into my world and try to sell me a pump that I know about? And it was strange, and it would bother me. And I remember being motivated to think, one day you're going to call me because you need me, and that was my motivation. But I can see how guys that were quarterbacks or wide receiver, well-known guy. I was just a lineman. Oh, you're a big guy. Did you play football? But can you imagine, being somebody from our generation, that was a quarterback and walks in there? I mean, it is. I don't want to say humiliating, but it's tough. Like, you're out there, making big money one day, and you're just a salesman the next. So being able to swallow that transition is one of the biggest things to being able to put your foot forward and protecting what you made as a player.
I know you also have a daughter, and I like to give the guests an opportunity to brag about their family. So please tell us a little bit more about your wife and a little about your daughter.
Okay. Well, I bragged a little bit about my wife. Prettiest girl I ever met. Okay, just wonderful. She's still the prettiest woman I know. She works hard, is very athletic, stays in shape, nutrition, constantly reminding me about nutrition. Wonderful. She's fun to be around, and really the smartest person in the world that I live. Her friends will come to her. My daughter will go to her. I'll go to, just like, "Hey, I've got this problem. What do you see the solution being?" And without batting an eye, she cuts through the emotion, and she's got an answer. I constantly say it, but my daughter's always saying, like, "Dad, Mom, how do you know this stuff?" And she just laughs. She just has a smart head, common sense wise, and intelligence wise. My daughter, being an only child, we were very close. She grew up in small town Montana, and if I ever went to town without her, people would say, "Something wrong with your daughter." We were always together. We still have a great relationship. Smart girl. I call her mini mom. She's just like her mother. Got a lot of her positive traits, and I really appreciate that. And she married a heck of a guy. I couldn't have picked a better guy. I mentioned earlier we're going to go to a barbecue contest together. We've got a lot of the same likes, hobby-wise, sense of humor. Unfortunately, my wife says, but we share a lot of things. So things are good. I've got a great wife, great daughter, great son-in-law, and good friends. I couldn't be happier.
Ron, in your playing career, and I guess coaching career, who was the best coach you were ever around? Who was the best player you were ever around? You're around some unbelievable of both.
Okay, I'm going to tell you two coaches, and it sounds like a cop-out, but it was Joe Paterno and Don Shula. And here's the thing. Neither one of them were a football genius, okay? There were things in Don Shula's offense. It's like he built an offense. The game got more complicated. He added this, added that, added. There's a purpose for everything. But then you look at it and you're like, oh, it's a mess. It was very complicated, hard. That aside, same with Joe Paterno. They taught you about life, and they were the most organized people I'd ever been around. And I don't care what company Joe Paterno or Don Shula could have run it. And I mentioned about time efficiency and risk reward. If I do this, what are the results coming from it? And managing people. I remember Don Shula asking a line coach in a meeting. We're watching film and hey, how are you guys going to pick up that blitz? And he goes, well, there's two ways. And Shula goes, I know there's two ways. I hired you. Which way are you picking? And I remember yeah, that's right. He didn't have an ego. Everybody has a role. Let's do it. Coordinates everything together. There's a lot of smart football coaches that can't be head coaches. You know what I mean? Because they don't have that. But, Joe Paterno is the same way. You'd walk out of one of his team meetings. He didn't even mention football, but for the next hour, you're going, wow, that was deep. He taught you about life, and so did Shula. So those were the guys. Barring none, best football player I was ever around, Reggie White. There's no comparison. I've played against Lawrence Taylor, Bruce Smith, Howie Long, Mark Gastineau, you name it. And I played against some Hall of Famers, and they were all good. But Reggie was better. One guy was real fast. Reggie was faster. One guy, his big thing was strength. Reggie was stronger. He had it all. Okay. Plus, he was the nicest person in the world. He was a great man, and he was fun to be around. He led by example, and I'm glad that I had a brush. My life crossed over with his for a short period, and if I can, I'd like to tell a quick story about the type of person he was. I had a friend from college, lived in the Philly area. He had a neighbor who had cystic fibrosis. The kid's name is Tim Horn. And when I got traded to Philly, my buddy calls me up and says, hey, can you come see this kid in the hospital? He's 18 years old. And, so I did every Friday. Tim, as you know, you get out of practice early on Friday. And, the one day you kind of get out of there early. So every Friday I would run downtown to see this young man. And this one particular Thursday night, I get a call from my friend, and he says, hey, you coming tomorrow? I said, yeah, it's Friday. And he says, well, you better hurry because Tim's in bad shape. I said, all right. So you come in after practice, and they had food out for the players, and the guys hung around and joked. It was a good atmosphere. And Reggie saw me run to the shower and run out, and he, hey, Helen, where are you going? Why are you in a rush? What's going on? And I told him, and he goes, I'd like to go see that kid one day. And I said, well, Reggie, if you want to go, you better go today because they're not sure how much longer he's got. He said, okay. He put his plate of food down, ran in, took a shower, called his wife, and he jumps in the truck with me, and we drive downtown Philly to go see this kid. And this was kind of funny, but it was like driving the Beatles around. You stop at a red light, and people are banging on the window chanting, Reggie, Reggie. Everybody knew him. But anyway, we get to the hospital, and the parents are outside with the doctors, and you could tell something bad's going on. And, they look and like, oh my God, Reggie White, can't believe it. And Tim was a big Eagles fan, and they said, well, he's unconscious. And, Reggie said, well, can I go talk to him? And Reggie had that distinct raspy voice, and he walked in, and I'm not saying this is a miracle or anything, but what I'm about to tell you, I know gave this young man a little more fight, I think he was ready to quit. But Reggie walked in, held his hand, and said, "Hey, Tim, it's Reggie White. It's Reggie White." And Tim sat up and opened his eyes and coughed and all that, and couldn't believe it. Reggie talked to him for a half an hour. I'm out in the hall with the parents. They're in tears, like, "Oh, we thought we'd never see him awake again," and this and that. Long story short, he wound up living about another month. The mother sent me a letter and sent one to Reggie, basically thanking us, thanking Reggie for giving her another month with her son. And I still have that letter. So when we're done, now this is our Friday night, one night out early, we get done and we walk out and the doctor says, "Reggie, that was a hell of a thing to witness, but this is the children's hospital and there's children all over the place." Reggie goes, "Let's go see him." And meanwhile, I want to go home and go out to dinner with my wife. And Reggie says, "Hey, you make sure nobody bothers me," like the adults. He went every room in that children's hospital and talked to every child in there, the parents that were in there. We were there till 10 o'clock at night. And he never filmed it, never told anybody. It wasn't like you see today, people do things just to do them, to get noticed. But that was Reggie White. And it was, people were pulling at him in a million directions to go, "Hey, Reggie, can you do this? Can you sign that? Can you?" And this he volunteered for and went above and beyond. And that's one example, but that's the way Reggie White lived. And he knew the power he had, and he was very graceful graceful about sharing that power with people.
Yeah, that's amazing. What a touching story.
Yeah.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
When week 16 of 1988, of my life or football life?
I guess both.
My football life was week 16, walking off the field in Dallas when I was with the Eagles, and we found out that the Giants had beat somebody, I forget who, and we were going to the playoffs or beat the Redskins. And it was my 5th year in the NFL, and I just was on horrible teams. And when I found out I was going to the playoffs, I literally just started crying, football wise. Meeting my wife had to be the highlight of my career, my career, of my life off the field.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
Getting traded twice or 3 times in one off season and still, making a career out of football.
What are you most excited about?
Being around my wife and daughter. We've set it up that, we've got a good life, and I worked hard my whole life and went through things like that, different injuries, but now we've got it where, there's security and great family with each other nearby.
What advice would you give your younger self?
I knew where the line was between good and bad and what I should do and not do. And I straddled that line quite a bit. I would say to stay on the side of good more often because, I never did anything that was just horrible. But I think back to some of the things I did and I'm amazed I didn't get hurt or badly damage myself. And I know that attitude probably helped me in my athletic career, but I wish I would have, been a little more calm when I was young.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
Tim, I've always respected you. I hated you for 60 minutes on the football field. It was a pleasure to meet you under friendly terms. I like what you're doing. I wasn't sure where this would go, but I had a great time. And Troy, again, thank you for having patience with an old man with no computer or IT skills. You made me feel good about myself, and I actually learned trying to get this thing up and running. So thank you both very much for caring enough to invite me on your show.
No problem at all. Before we go, last question is we ask every guest, who are a couple of people that you know personally that you think we should try to get on the show?
I'll tell you, Jim McMahon. I don't know what you think of Jim McMahon, Tim, but I keep in touch with him all the time, and anytime you talk to him, I mean, it's full tilt go. So he's quite a guest.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Ron Heller, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Like you said, it's been nice being on the same team for once. Thank you very much for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you for the invite and good luck, and I really appreciate it.
Today's episode is brought to you by the ALS Investment Fund, a specialized biotech venture capital investment firm focused on neurodegenerative diseases, particularly ALS. They manage a large and diversified worldwide portfolio of ALS-related companies, collaborating with a global network of scientists, clinicians, foundations, and patient advocates to accelerate therapeutic development, investing for a world without ALS. Discover more about their mission and impact at alsinvestmentfund.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider supporting the podcast for free by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform, leaving a review, and sharing it with your friends. Your support means the world to us. This episode of Nothing Left Unsaid is brought to you by 11 Labs. Their groundbreaking technology makes a huge difference, and we're grateful for their support. To learn more, visit 11labs.io. A substantial portion of our sponsorship proceeds go to tackleals.com, funding cutting-edge ALS research. If you'd like to join the fight and contribute, visit tackleals.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Nothing Left Unsaid.